Welcome back to the Pete Souza Show. This is a very special segment coming up here. Alejandro Villanueva and Bob Kuberski know a little bit about the Army-Navy game and serving the red, white, and blue. The 126th meeting between Army and Navy has taken place this weekend at M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore. Navy at 9-2, Army at 6-5. This, by the way, as we bring these gentlemen on right now, there they are. Bob, the captain. What's going on, fellas?
Pete, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you guys so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. And this is for the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. The stakes are high. Captain Villanueva, let's start with you. Going into a game like this, how much do you get like those butterflies and that excitement this time of year when you come up on this special game, Army-Navy?
Well, I think it's very difficult to explain to the average college fan just the amount of pressure that goes into beating Navy every single year, because the entire academy is almost made to foster this rivalry. So that from the moment you get in, it's beat Navy, beat Navy, beat Navy. And I know it's the same thing at the Naval Academy. It's beat Army, beat Army, beat Army. And so you spend the entire year thinking to yourself, if I don't beat Navy, it's going to be a failure of a season. So regardless of the records, that last game, the beating the Navy is so special and so important to the cadets because it stays with them for the rest of their careers. They'll count to themselves how many years they beat Navy. Basically, no other games up until this point really matter for the Army football program right now.
Hey, Bob, I want to go over to you. You grew up outside of Philadelphia. You went to Ridley. And the reason I bring that up not only is because I'm from Philly, so I went to Archbishop Carroll, so tip of the cap to you there, aside from, your service. But in the Northeast, for me, that was like a huge college football game. We didn't have a college football team, really. We had Temple, but, but that game really captured me as a young man. I wanted to play at Navy. I wasn't good enough, so I had to go to Richmond. But I ended up falling in love with that rivalry, I think partially because of the proximity to where I lived. Did that have anything to do with sort of a want and a need and a movement to go to Navy and to serve maybe that region of the country? It's special there.
Yeah, I think all of those apply, Pete, for sure. In terms of the lore of the game here in the Philadelphia area, being a Delaware County native myself, my interest actually came at an earlier age, and it's a story I tell all the time, and it actually revolves around Roger Staubach. And I used to watch the Dallas Cowboys. Alejandro, you're a bit younger than me, but in the 70s, and see Roger the Dodger. And I actually bought a book about the Naval Academy when I was not even 10. And that's where my interest came. My first actually participation in an Army-Navy game was as a recruit, as senior at Ridley High School, in 1988 in Veterans Stadium where they played at the time. Was my first experience, and I was hooked. Hook, line, and sinker. It's where I wanted to go. I wanted to serve my country, and oh, by the way, get a place to, chance to play football. And then the cream of the crop, though, is Army-Navy. And having been in a Super Bowl environment, in the past as a professional athlete, I can tell you that the butterflies were much more prevalent for me, at least with Army-Navy, in a college setting. So what a wonderful experience, and something that players like us get to look back on with great fondness. And I look forward to this game and this week, and this day, like it's Christmas, my birthday, Easter, Thanksgiving, all wrapped into one, where you get to see the most wonderful people in the world that you've ever been able to be around. So really looking forward to this one.
Alejandro, I would like to ask you a question about, and this also applies to you, Bob, so we'll get back to you on this. First of all, I don't want to bury the lead. Well, the lead is that you guys both served America, and we're talking about the Army-Navy game. Alejandro, you a captain in Army. Bob, your affiliation with Navy, being an ensign there. I want to ask Alejandro about, you play for the Steelers, but in between you finishing up your career at Navy, you showed 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. You are an airborne ranger. And then you go to the NFL. How did your service for America following your career at Army prepare you for the NFL? Or was it like vice versa? Did football help you? Just what's the thread there?
I get asked that question all the time, and it seems very romantic to be able to make that connection between the two. How to be a Naval Ranger prepare you for, the NFL. But unfortunately I don't think I think you better prepare by running 40s and benching 225, and not rucking 20, 30 miles in the middle of the night with no food and no sleep. I do think that football does help a lot in the military, in the sense that you learn how to lead, and you learn how to be around men. So if you've ever been in a locker room, there's a lot of friction in locker rooms. There's a lot of challenges in locker rooms. There's a lot of speeches that coaches have to make to rally the troops. And so you just start developing a lot of social skills that you might not otherwise have if you spend all day in a lab, like a little lab rat, and you barely have any interaction with people that come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people that come from different parts of the country. So football forces you to face your teammates. And I think once you go into the military, that's all you're going to be facing. You're going to be facing your the members of your company, your platoon. And so football does have a lot of social skills. And ultimately, obviously, in football, you cherish and you look forward to people when they're down. Everybody knows that when you're playing amazing and everything's working out, you're not really measuring the value of a player. When you're down, when you're struggling, that's when you truly see the character of somebody. So I don't think that the military prepares you for the NFL. Otherwise, all the NFL players would be veterans. But I do think that the football has amazing values that are admirable, and that's the reason why both academies really love football. Stanford, Harvard, they love swimming because swimmers are just psychopaths that have incredible discipline. But at the academies, you're managing people, and I do think that football does have that connection to leadership.
Yeah, Bob, you were a leader. You were a union rep in the NFL, and I have to imagine some of that spawned from the fact that your time at the Naval Academy. I mean, and the way you carried yourself in the locker room. Both you guys playing, by the way, for the two of the premier organizations in the NFL. Great careers. Alejandro with the Steelers, Bob, you with the Packers. How did you find yourself, Bob, using the perspective you had or were granted during your time serving America, and now you're on the football field in the trenches? Can you describe a little bit the perspective that you get from being a player at a service academy and then serving the country when you take the field in the NFL?
Yeah, and I love what Alejandro said about the military and the NFL and sort of football and translation. And the immediate thing I thought of when you asked that question, Pete, was um, the military is the ultimate team sport. Alejandro knows it from a combat perspective, not a circumstance that I was able to replicate in my military career. Not quite as long on active duty either, but the ultimate team sport. And I can tell, Alejandro and I have never met. I feel like we have speed of trust with service academy people, Army, Navy alike. I could tell he is intelligent. He's conversant. He's engaging. He's can be an exciting person to listen to and talk to. And those are exactly some of the intangible traits that translate well in a team environment. And for me, it was a great experience coming, from the Naval Academy. My first experience in Green Bay was going to post-tramp mini camp in a uniform in April of my senior year. And then, going back to the Green Bay, in a uniform, coming off of active duty. And, the way I was treated was different than a rookie, number one. I was elected by my teammates to be a union representative for 3 years in Green Bay. You can't do it, by the way, your first year as a rookie. You're not allowed to be a rep. But, I think they look up to members of the military. And this is not specific to me. There's a different way that people think about you, a different, expectation that they have of you in terms of how you conduct yourself. And you would certainly think, if you're leading an NFL organization or any team, and I said, the military, the ultimate team sport, you would think you want to line your locker room with guys like that, that they got your back. They're doing things morally, ethically. They're doing that, and they're actually, pervading, their other teammates and rubbing off on them, right? And locker room guys. And for me, my career, had some starts as a player, but was a backup defensive lineman. Alejandro, starting, left tackle. But being a locker room guy was an important part of what I could bring to my role on the team, because it wasn't as a marquee player, right? I wasn't Reggie White, who had the privilege of playing next to, but that was really important. So I loved every aspect of that, and representing the Naval Academy, representing the Navy, representing the military in our nation, tremendously important for me. Personally, I'm sure Alejandro can say the same.
It's important for me to even have you guys in this space with me today, because that's how highly I think of you guys and folks who serve America. Alejandro, what's something about this rivalry that only guys who play for Army and Navy are familiar with? Like something that would surprise the average person?
The fact that I am the worst person in the entire world to ask about rivalries. I grew up in a naval base. I grew up in Rota Naval Station. I love history. History is one of my biggest passions, and I do think that as an American, as an average American, we should root to have the strongest Navy ever. Always, the Navy should always be our priority and our measuring stick of who we are as a nation. When we say, how are we doing militarily, we should be asking how many ships we're building. What do our ships look like? For me, any game of football is a fun game of football. I love the game of football above, loyalties to one academy or the other. Matter of fact, I wanted to become a naval officer, but I was colorblind, and then I had to go to Army. But for me, the rivalries in football are, is just any game is fun. You go out there, you want to see a good game. You want to see a game that is tight towards the end, that has the elements of a Greek tragedy with the last minute touchdown, the last minute field goal. And I think that because Army and Navy know each other so well, it's almost like playing a divisional game in the NFL, where that the triple option is not going to surprise anybody at Army. It's not going to surprise the relentless run of the game, the big play action. So there are no surprises. The cadets of the academy understand this Mahan doctrine of geopolitics and the way that we fit in. Obviously, if the Army has intrinsic leadership, abilities that we have to remain in terms of honors. We all have kind of the same measuring stick of who we have to become as officers. But the game itself is something that you hope that it becomes a big upset and it has all the elements of the pageantry that you hope from Ohio State, Michigan, or any other Steelers, Ravens, or whatever you might be.
It's so cool. It's one of the only games really that still is like a standalone game. And as far as like you mentioned the option, I had a game this year where I had USF, and the week before they lost to Navy because, USF had a great defense. They have a great defense, but, their coordinators talked about it. Like, we could not stop. You can plan that all week long and run it all day long, but once they come out, it's like your guys are always like jerking around. It's just so interesting that is still run, and that's still the blueprint. Bob, I want to ask you a little bit about a moment you remember in your career at Navy, playing in the Army-Navy game. Like, what sticks out to you the most, something you'll never forget on the field or around a particular game?
I think, I was thinking about this when Alejandro was talking a little bit, and, everyone knows that, we're brothers forever, in the service, right? In the context of this game, it's Army and Navy. But for that day, we're enemies. And I think what sticks out with me the most is, and you talked about like the option and there's schemes and maybe there's a trick play. And of course, someone's going to make a big play or several big plays. But what it really comes down to with Army and Navy, and you talk about throwing the records out. I mean, this is the series where you throw the records out. So it's really the grit. And I mean, I can honestly sit here and tell you, I think the game's a little bit different today, from a rules standpoint, of course. But I wanted to knock the hell out of my Army counterpart just enough so that if he didn't come back and play in the game the rest of the day, I was happy with that. I didn't want to injure anybody. I didn't want anything permanent, but I really wanted to knock the snot out of him. And that would have been okay if they had to go over and take a breather and get some water. But it is a struggle. It is a fight in the trenches. Alejandro, I think you were a tight end when you were at West Point and
Wide
converted.
receiver. I was a wide receiver.
Okay, yeah,
That's crazy. I read that. I couldn't
bit.
believe it.
Yeah, but I mean, in the trenches, I can tell you there was nothing like it. The hitting, the intensity, and that's why it's one of the very favorite sporting events that I've ever gotten to be a part of. Not only as a fan at one point, but as a player and involved. And that is a very, very, very hard fought win when you come out of Army Navy on a Saturday in December. Versus the other games you play. It's not that you don't want to have the intensity, but there's an it factor there that's just ingrained in you, imbued in you, developed in you throughout your career at the academy.
Yeah, Bob, you tapped into something real cool. Alejandro, you were part of a service family, and you lived all over the globe. In Belgium, you were playing rugby, and then you started to play football. And then I read something where you were a little confused with the rules, and you were hitting somebody late. I read a story about that because you thought it was still rugby and the play was still going on. Then you're a wide receiver, a D lineman, and a left tackle. I think all at Navy or Army, excuse me. Talk to me about the development of you as a football player and learning the game, right? And obviously being so well versed, you played so many different positions.
Yeah, of course. So I would say that one of the things that really helped me was the fact that, as a European, I played a lot of soccer. And I think that soccer gives you mobility and spatial awareness that you might not otherwise have in American sports, because a lot of them are, basketball is the only one that's continuous flow. But outside of basketball, everything kind of stops. Everything is a little bit robotic. My kids are playing baseball and football now, and everything kind of stops and you reassess. But rugby and soccer, you're continuously flowing. So I always felt that I was a little bit like a German Shepherd. I was a little bit good at everything, and I could do, maybe things that in the world of sports that my counterparts, that I've grown up just playing American football, were not able to do. But I did recognize one variable, and that is I could not play without knowing the snap count, meaning I was not explosive enough to play D-line. So they tried to put me at D-line, when I was at Army. They tried to put me at D-line when I was with the Philadelphia Eagles. But I always sensed that I was reacting a little bit. And when you play defense, the one attribute to play in the defensive line is you have to snap out and you have to be extremely explosive right off the bat. So I wasn't like that. I was more of a thinker. I was more of somebody who had to envision the play and analyze and overthink everything. And so naturally, I ended up playing offensive tackle. But I would have to say that once you catch the ball in a football game on a fade route, football is over. Football, like you just feel like you're a second-class citizen on the football field, because there's nothing cooler than scoring a touchdown, than tracking the ball, putting outside shoulder. That is what we play now at tailgates. We don't go out to a tailgate and we do one-on-ones. We go out to a tailgate and we toss the pigskin around. And so I thought that if I could go back all the way to the beginning, to my first day at West Point, I would have said, don't put me at anything that doesn't get the ability to get a touchdown, because that is truly the coolest feeling in football.
I love it. All right, a couple more things with you guys. I want to tap into the leadership aspect again. Bob, you mentioned you started sometimes you were a backup. You had a great career with the Packers. You played in the Super Bowl. Was there ever a moment where the team, and outside of being a union rep, maybe it was motivation, maybe it was a lesson needed to be learned, where your team turned to you knowing that your time as at the Naval Academy and your service afterwards, that obviously that was special, and that was something they could learn from. Did they ever have a moment where they were like, hey, like, Bob, what do you think about this? Like, with your experience, like, can you please shed some light on this and give us direction?
Mine, yes, Pete. Maybe not in a glorified sense that I'd love to be able to tell you, this tremendous story of, leadership. But I think, probably two aspects to answer your question. One is just being, a consummate leader, and that's, whether it's in drills. I wasn't the best athlete on the defensive line in Green Bay or anywhere for that matter. But I'm first up. I'm going through the bags, right? I'm going full speed, and maybe somebody else isn't. I'm doing the right thing. I'm going home on time. I'm making sure that my teammate next to me, maybe they're in a situation where they need a little bit of help. So I'm doing that. So I think that's a big part of leadership. It's leading by example. You hear that all the time. Sounds like a cliche thing, but it's real. The second aspect was more around sort of the personal side. So outside of like, hey, X's and O's, football playing in the game, around the personal side. And, one of the things that I developed when I was in the NFL via an internship first, and then I actually went to work at Morgan Stanley as a financial advisor, but was from people coming to me and talking about off the field um, finances, issues, things like that, where there's another opportunity to be a leader in a different way. Not so much of a rah-rah, let me give the pregame speech.
Yeah.
For us, Alejandro probably had a similar experience in our room, in our defense, was Reggie White, was Brett Favre, who was our quarterback for my 4 years there in Green Bay. So more, that leading by example aspect, and then that, hey, I need to talk to you about something here on the side personally, and drawing from that experience that you get as a leader in the military.
But so you would see something and say something like, you have the mettle to share with someone. You see it as an opportunity, right? Like I would imagine that would come from your experience.
It does. And I mean, just really being honest with people. A lot of times it's uncomfortable when you tell someone something honest that they don't want to hear. And that's why it's uncomfortable. But really being honest with people and being what I call steadfast, stay true, hold fast, like those principles that you think about. It's being on time. It's everything, right? There's all these little things that you can do, and that establishes who you are, whether you do them consciously or subconsciously, and that allows you to have integrity and honest conversations, right? And talk about the facts and what's real. Alejandro will tell you when you lead young men and women that you get assigned when you're a very young man. 22, I was an ensign. Alejandro was a second lieutenant. Those are, by the way, the same thing and same rank, in different armed forces in the services. But you get situations that you're not going to get as a regular person, coming out into the real world. So life and death sometimes, circumstances, personal, professional, all kinds of stuff. And that makes you different. And I think your teammates realize that and they look up to you in a different way because of that.
Alejandro, if you could say anything to the guys at Army before they take the field, or if you had any message for guys getting ready to play in this game, that something that you gleaned during your time playing in this rivalry, what would it be?
I was not somebody that that believe in halftime speeches or that believe in speeches to motivate yourself. I always liked football because it's a great way to compete where you can hit somebody. You can physically impose your will. You can it's like boxing. It's almost like a combat sport that you have to do with your teammates. So um, football is, especially the Army Navy game, is sometimes the last game that a lot of these kids are going to play. So the culture of football in America, what I've experienced, that you start at a very early age. Your dad is trying to live his dreams through you, and then somehow you end up becoming successful in high school, and then you can continue to play. But at some point, whether it's college or professional, the game of football ends. And so sometimes you have to put things in perspective and say, you know, this could be my last game of football. You know, you could get injured and you cannot play again. This could be, you have to almost live the game of football like it's your last day. And so any chance that you get you know, football, you can't really play out at the beach with your buddies. You're not going to put pads and shoulder pads and whatnot. When you play football, it has to be organized. It has to mean something. It's playing for somebody. Somebody's paying so that you can play football. So I always encourage everybody to approach the game of football like they're gonna have no regrets. Sometimes you feel a little bit, you know, that you're gonna mess up and then you're gonna let people down, especially in college. There's a lot of things. The mental state of each player before going to a game varies tremendously. So for me, it's just, you know, playing with no regrets. Could be your last time dressing up in a uniform to play the game of football. It's a very beautiful environment to do it at Army Navy. Feel very privileged, feel very thankful, and enjoy the moment because, like I said, it just doesn't last forever.
Ensign Kuberski, Captain Villanueva, man. It's a privilege to share this time with you guys. I can't thank you enough for all you've done for America and just like taking time to hang with us today. Where are you guys going to be watching the game? Will you be in Baltimore for it?
No, I'll be in my couch.
How about you, Bob?
I'll be in section 232. I've made every Army Navy game since I retired. And to be again around my teammates, you know, we'll be together tomorrow night. We'll be on the bus on Saturday. We have a lot, the club level, you know, where we enjoy because we're getting older and we like to go get warm, but we'll be there with my family and closest friends. And someday, Alejandro, we'll have to get you, you know, next year it's at MetLife Stadium. I'd love to meet you in person sometime. We got to connect for sure. But
it's just tough when in Florida, when you get the weather in Florida that we get right now. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, what's the weather going to be like up there?
Not warm.
Hey, you guys, thank you so much. I mean, I really, really appreciate it. You guys mean a lot. And, you know, I was never good enough to play at either service academy. So thank you very much for being an extension of my dreams today. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you very much. Take care, gentlemen. Army Navy coming up this Saturday. The Commander-in-Chief Trophy at stake. Wow, that was very cool. Way to go, Chris Visser. Thank you so much for putting that together. Alejandro Villanueva and Bob Kuberski. Just what a privilege. What a privilege. Army Navy is unbelievable. Truth, that's very, very true. As a football nut growing up as a kid, I was always around the TV trying to find the next football game. And, you know, on this weekend, there were no other games, which I thought was such a perfect position to be put in, where you had the opportunity to witness the Army-Navy game and everything that came with us. And at that point, I was like, man, I really wanted to go to Navy because a guy, Andy Person, who grew up around where I grew up, went and he started at Navy as a defensive end. He was really good. Andy's the best. I'll keep in touch with him today. And if he'd played in the NFL, maybe he would have taken Bob Kuberski's spot, but he didn't, and Bob did. So, all right, we'll step aside and come back. We're presented by Slovakics. We've got some NFL picks coming up and a little bit more on the Sharon Moore situation. But yeah, we'll be right back.
Serving Central Texas since 1889,